Well, we live in a world where people are plagued by fear. Now, as you know, fear can be a good thing or a bad thing. Some people suffer from very unhealthy fears, from what do we call those? Phobias. And the definition of a phobia is a persistent, irrational fear of a specific object, activity, or situation that leads to a compelling desire to avoid it. Now, as you all know, there's like tons and tons and tons of different phobias. And some of them are kind of unusual. For instance, some people suffer from pantherophobia. Does anyone know what pantherophobia is? Anybody? There's some guesses, some murmurings. You're not very confident. No one's just shouting it out.
Afraid of hands.
No. Bob, it is a fear of your mother-in-law. Okay, so not just Bob's mother-in-law, anybody's mother-in-law. So pantherophobia, okay, if we're putting this in the context of our definition, it would be a persistent, irrational fear of your mother-in-law that leads to a compelling desire to avoid her. I'm like, how many of you suffer from that one? You have to be careful there, don't you? Especially if she's like sitting next to you. And I think this phobia stuff can be kind of interesting. And so I want to just share with you the top 7 most common phobias. Number 7 is emetophobia. Anybody know what that is? Yes, it's exactly right. It's fear of throwing up, fear of vomit. And so here's a more thorough explanation that I found somewhere. You may be afraid to vomit, okay, or you may also feel awkward to see others vomiting. I'm pretty sure I have that one, to be honest. I'm not crazy about vomit. Okay, number 6, acrophobia. No. Fear of heights. That's right. It's fear of heights. How many of you go, okay, yeah, I am irrationally afraid of heights. Yeah, that's a big one. Okay. Number 5, claustrophobia, which I think we know what that is. It's fear of being trapped in confined spaces. Number 4 is one that actually might be a little less familiar. It's number 4, though, is agoraphobia. And here's what this is. It's an intense fear and avoidance of any place or situation where escape might be difficult or help unavailable in the event of developing sudden panic-like symptoms. Confession time. How many of you prefer to sit on the end of an aisle at church so that escape is easier if you suddenly had some panic situation that you... How many of you? Look at all you. You all happen to be on the end of an aisle except one right here. You're one seat away. We got a few agoraphobes in here. All right, number 3, aerophobia. What is that? Yeah, fear of flying. Okay, fear of flying. And I found this, that's just fear of flying. And then number 2 is social phobia. And so it's just a fear of being evaluated negatively in social situations, so much so that you avoid going into them, which is a pretty sad deal in reality. And I found this interesting. Approximately 5.3 million Americans suffer from social phobia. Okay, anybody have a guess for the number 1? Arachnophobia. You guys are nailing that. It is arachnophobia, fear of spiders. And listen to how common this one is. Get this, 10% of men and 50% of women suffer from this. And I have to admit, I am not somebody who's like crazy about spiders. I don't love them. And this is a time of year in our part of the world where they're just like, they're everywhere, aren't they? It's nuts. Jen and I were watching TV the other night, and I don't know if this happens to you, but our carpet is kind of light colored. And so we're watching TV, and all of a sudden I see a rat running across the floor, and it catches my eye, and I look, and I go, oh, that's not a rat. That thing was just... And so Jen was like, babe. I was like, yeah, okay. So I went and got toilet paper. And it ran underneath the TV cabinet thing. And so I was like, I'm not crawling down there and putting my face, So I sat back down. And Jen was like, okay, but as soon as it comes out, and I was like, yeah, all right. So then it came out, but the thing was moving so fast. It was, those things they fly. They were just mad. So I was like, man, I do not feel comfortable walking up with toilet paper and trying to. So I just grabbed the biggest pillow off the couch and I walked up and just bang. And Jen goes, "You cannot tell Brooklyn that you did that." Because then I just put the pillow back on the couch. So, fears. Now, Monica, what was that? Was that Monica? Oh. Yeah, just cozy up, get your face on there. You're all invited to come watch the Seahawks game on our couch after. No, I for the most part, I do okay with spiders, unless they're like huge, and then I discover they're suddenly right next to me. And many of you know Tom Gammon. You've known him for a long time. He's the guy that's playing bass this morning, and he's been at Brookview like forever, all the way back. And in the early years of Brookview, way back in the old Linwood High School when we were over there in the early 2000s, he has this greenhouse, and he used to bring in these just vibrant flowers. And he was like, let's put these up and decorate the stage. And I was like, awesome. And so we would have this stand, and we would have this beautiful flower arrangement, which made me look awesome, right in front of the music stand. And so the problem was that during the wrong time of year, like this time of year, it was like they would always come with spiders. So he'd have this beautiful arrangement, and then like in the middle of the sermon, with this arrangement right below the music stand, I would be speaking and looking at my notes, and suddenly, this big spider right on my notes. So this was happening week after week after week, and I was, and I'd be, so Jesus loves you. Ah! It's just like, and so one week after this had happened like 6 or 7 times, I started to get over it a little bit. And so I had this one that was really big, and it was right on my notes. And so I was going along, and you would have been proud of me. I was just like, it didn't even faze me. I saw it, and I just went whoosh, like that and kept going. But that meant the spider went whoosh, right out into where everybody's sitting. And you would not believe how many acrophobes we have in our church. And they just started squirming. You started watching people like start to hyperventilate, right? And so all of a sudden I realized nobody's with me. Like everyone's trying to figure out where the spider went. And so Jen, with all of her compassion and grace, just walks over and just goes. And that was it. So later in the service, she realized she needed to take care of something, so she got up and went and dealt with that thing. When she finally got back to her seat, someone had slipped a little note onto her chair that said, "Spider murderer." So it's weird because like some people suffer from arachnophobia, and other people are like extreme animal activists. Like save the spiders. We all have fears, and as we know, that's not always bad, right? There's good, healthy fear that keeps us from doing stupid things we shouldn't do. But then there's bad, unhealthy fear. And a part of becoming emotionally and spiritually mature is learning somehow to differentiate between the two. And here's one of the major challenges in all this. It's actually possible to have our behavior severely affected by certain fears without being aware that those fears are present in us. Okay? They can operate below the surface, and we don't even realize they're there. They're active, and they're driving our behavior, but we don't know. Now, it could be a fear of intimacy, right? Could be a fear of failure. Could be a fear of somebody leaving me, a fear of abandonment. And one of the things that counselors sometimes do is help people identify the fears that are driving their behaviors. They help bring the stuff that's beneath the surface out in the open so it can be dealt with. So after a while, a person can start to realize, wow, like the reason I treat my wife or my husband or my boyfriend or my girlfriend or my kids or my friends or my coworkers like that is that actually I'm afraid. I have these surface issues in the way that I relate to people or the world, but underneath all of that, I'm actually being driven by my fears. Now, there's a kind of a universal fear that I think every one of us has on some level. I think all of us are affected by this fear to some degree. And this is a fear that often operates underground. It often is driving us and driving our behaviors and our reaction to the world in ways we don't even realize. And the fear is this: that life might get out of control in some way. We're afraid that we might lose control of our lives. I'm afraid that if I get deeper in this relationship and make more of a commitment, I might lose control. And I just can't do that. So I'm just going to keep this relationship at a superficial level. I'll even sabotage the relationship if I have to, but I will not allow this to progress to deeper levels of commitment. If I did that, I would start to feel out of control. Or I'm afraid that if I lose my job, I'll lose control of my life. I'll lose my reputation as being successful, or I'll be in financial crisis. And I can't bear the thought of that. So I'll step on whoever I need to step on. I'll do whatever it takes, even if it's unethical, possibly even criminal, to advance in the company and keep my job because I cannot lose control. Or I'm dating this person that I know isn't good for me. I know. But I'm terrified to break up because if I were single and all alone again, I would feel out of control. Life would be spinning away from me. So even though I know this person isn't good for me, I'm going to stay with them. I just can't bear the thought of being single and being all alone like I used to be. I'm afraid that if I don't keep my grade point at a certain level, I won't be able to get into the college of my dreams. And if that happened, life would start to get out of control. So even if I have to cheat to get the grades that I want, I'll do it. I will not let life get out of control. I will do whatever it takes to maintain control. Or one last one. I'm terrified that the person I'm with might leave me someday. And I just can't face that possibility. So I'll manipulate, I'll criticize, I'll dominate, and I'll scratch and claw and do everything in my power to make sure that this person never walks away from me. I'll smother them if I have to because I cannot face the possibility of losing control of this relationship. And behind the fear of losing control is this thought. I don't know if I could handle that. I don't know if I could handle losing that job or that relationship or losing my dream. I don't know if I could handle a long-term, fully committed relationship. That might be crazy for me. So I got to do everything in my power to retain control of my life. Because if I were to lose control, I'd be forced down a road that leads to the unknown. And I am afraid that I couldn't handle it. So unhealthy fear leads to all kinds of weird attempts to control things. Now, maybe you're here and you're sitting next to your spouse and you're thinking, man, this is going to be awesome. Because I live with a control freak. And we stood at the altar and he told me he loved me or she told me she loved me. Okay, but I don't usually feel loved. I just feel controlled. It seems like they're always criticizing me or manipulating me or trying to control my every move. I feel like I live with this person that just has to control everything. I can't wait for them to hear this message. And so, if you're here this morning and that you're sitting next to that person, this is not elbow time. This is a time to just sit back and let the Holy Spirit work. Or maybe you're sitting here and there's a part of you, and thinking about this, listening to this, that's just going, yeah. I hate to admit it, but really, that's me. I got control issues. I tend to be a lot more controlling than I should, and it's really not good. And I want to tell you that if you're somebody that really has control issues, if you were to peel back the layers and get to what's underneath all of it, here's what you'd find. Fear. You're afraid that if you lose control, you won't be able to handle it, and that fear is driving your life. And maybe part of the problem for you is you've had a difficult past, right? That's legit. It happens to people all the time. Maybe you've had significant experiences at some point where you've had no control and it's been horrible. Maybe your parents divorced when you were little and you're just tossed back and forth between homes and you remember what that felt like, 2 houses, 2 different lives, and it felt totally out of control to you. And there's a part of you that just screams out like, I am never going back to that again. Or maybe there was a time where someone abandoned you and you just felt lost and you felt helpless, you felt out of control, and there's a part of you that just says, I cannot go through that again. Or maybe you're someone that was picked on or even abused at some point. And there was nothing that you could do to stop it, and it was out of control. And there's something inside of you that screams out, I will never, ever let that happen again. When I was going to school up at Western, I lived for 1 year in a house with 4 other Christian guys. So there were 5 of us. And it was amazing because the 5 of us got along incredibly well. It was just unbelievable. In fact, I wouldn't have anticipated this going in, but I could count on one hand the number of conflicts or fights that happened in our house that year. But it's interesting because in every significant conflict that happened in our house, one of my roommates was always at the center of it. There was one guy that was at the heart of every single conflict we had that year. And I remember the one conflict that I had with him, like a whole year, I had one conflict with one person, and it was him. And what happened is he asked me to play cards one day. We're just sitting around the house, and he said, "You want to play cards?" I think we're playing spades. And as we played, people started to gather around and watch because my roommates were there, and they actually had several friends that were there. And so there ended up being a pretty good audience watching me and him go back and forth playing spades. And he started to get really uptight. You've seen people do this when they're playing a game and people are watching. He's starting to get really uptight, and suddenly he's getting like hyper competitive, which he wasn't until there were all these people watching. And so he starts talking smack and the whole deal. Now, in spite of his smack talking, I won. And because he was so insanely competitive, like obnoxiously competitive, because he talked smack all the way through the whole game, when I won, everyone laughed. And everyone cheered. And they laughed at him. And I'm telling you, it just sent him over the edge. He actually stood up, took the cards, and threw them on the floor. This is a 22-year-old, for the most part, a very nice Christian guy. And all year long, we got along great. We were really good friends. Just a great guy. But in that moment, he flipped out. Now, looking back on that scene and thinking about his life and why he did that, it occurred to me that he grew up as the youngest of several brothers. And he used to get picked on, really, really bad. I mean, they were just merciless. And so now I'm not a therapist, but here's what I think. I think that everyone laughing at him in that moment brought back this wave of emotions that he had felt many times before. And it just reminded him of feeling out of control with his brothers. And there was something that was driving him to do everything he could to regain control of the situation. So the only thing he could think of was to grab the cards and toss them on the floor. He figured that I would pick them up. He couldn't control the game. He couldn't control everybody laughing at him. But I think he thought maybe he could control me, make me pick up the cards. And so some of you might be wondering. Let me just say, I did not pick them up. I refused. I just got up and walked away because it turns out I have my own control issues. But here's what I think. I think we all struggle with this. We all do on some level. We want to be in control of our lives, and the thought of losing control is deeply disturbing to us. And I would bet that most of us are affected by our fear of losing control far more than we realize. And if we were somehow able to be set free from this fear, it could impact virtually every part of our lives. If I were to let go of this fear that I have all the time of losing control, I would be a better husband. I'd be a better father. I'd be a better friend. And I'll tell you what, I'd be a much better pastor. I'd be free to relate. I'd be able to let go of anxiety and worry. I'd be able to focus on other people's needs a whole lot more. Generally speaking, I would be a more loving person. And I think that this is true of every single one of us. So this morning, we're going to look at a scene with Jesus and his disciples. A scene where things are getting like way out of control. And here's why we're looking at this particular story. In the midst of this scene, there's an insight that the disciples gain that if we could gain, would liberate us. It would free us. So here's how the story goes. Mark chapter 4, verse 35. It says, "That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, 'Let us go over to the other side.' Now, they're standing kind of near the Sea of Galilee, which is about 12 miles by 7 miles. And the point of their destination was about 6 miles away. It's evening and the sun is setting. And Jesus says, hey guys, let's cross the lake. So Jesus and the disciples, they climb into the boat, verses 36, 37. It says, leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Okay, so suddenly, and you have to imagine, these guys are experienced fishermen. They've been on the water their whole lives. They've operated boats their entire lives. And they are caught by surprise by this furious storm. And just to kind of paint a picture for you, the Sea of Galilee was surrounded, still is surrounded, by mountains on all sides. And so storms, even very severe ones, could just sort of blow in from nowhere. They had no idea they were coming. And so that's what happens. This massive storm blows in from out of nowhere. And the disciples, now in the middle of the lake, are caught completely off guard. Okay, and this is no minor storm. You have to envision that like the wind is hurricane-like, like it's deafening. And the disciples, they're trying to yell back and forth about what to do, and they can hardly even hear each other. And the boat is being thrown just back and forth on these swells, and it's taking on water. They're about to capsize, okay, to go under. It says the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. And you want to talk about feeling out of control. And this is no phobia, right? This is not irrational fear. This fear is extremely rational. Now look at what happens. Verse 38. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. Then the disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Now originally, this is kind of cool. Originally, the book of Mark was written in Greek. And so if you translate the Greek very literally, it says that the disciples, okay, very literally in Greek, said to Jesus, "Matters it not to thee that we are perishing?" And I love that. Just like, sounds like something Yoda would say. "Matters it not to thee that we are perishing?" So, I mean, they're there and they're going like we've weathered storms on the water before, but never anything like this. Jesus, we're going to drown. Don't you care? Like, what's the matter with you? So here's what Jesus does, verse 39. He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. Can you imagine that? Like, can you imagine being one of the disciples? Can you imagine Jesus standing in the boat with you doing that? And in the next few moments, something happens inside the hearts of the disciples that if it could happen to me, I would be a different person. I would be a stronger person. If what happened in their hearts could happen to us, we would be liberated. We would experience so much freedom. Now look at what happens, verse 40. He said to the disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Seriously, Jesus? Like, doesn't that sound like a dumb question? Like, because, I mean, they're standing there drenched. The boat itself is beaten to shreds. They're barely floating. Their clothes are all torn up. They're all ripped up. They're all just dripping wet, just their hearts are, and Jesus says, "Why are you so afraid?" I mean, if you're a disciple, what do you say? I mean, like, I'd be going, "Jesus, what's the matter with you? Like, don't you realize," well, maybe you're groggy still from the nap. Like, You realize what just happened here? We almost drowned. Like, that's why we're so afraid. And in case you haven't clued in, like being the Son of God and all, here's how it works with mortals. When life gets out of control, see, that elicits fear. And life was out of control, so we were all afraid. When things get out of hand and we can't fix it, it elicits a response in us called fear. And it's as if Jesus was saying, hey, you didn't have to be afraid. And the disciples must have been going, well, what do you mean we didn't have to be afraid? I'm like, you don't understand, Jesus. It's cause and effect. When life spins out of control, we get afraid. And Jesus is looking at them in this very teachable moment, something they would remember for the rest of their lives. And his point is simple. You didn't have to be afraid. And the implication is, and this is so powerful, this is so important. And if we could get this and experience this, it would set us free. The implication is, just because life spins out of control doesn't mean you have to be afraid. The disciples are going, well, Jesus, we thought the one always followed the other. Like, if life's out of control, then there has to be fear. It's just cause and effect. It's like being, unsuspended in the air leads to falling. Like pounding a Slurpee leads to a brain freeze. Like being a Mariners fan leads to depression. This is what the disciples were thinking, right? Life out of control leads to fear. It's just cause and effect. The one automatically leads to the other. And Jesus is saying, wrong. It doesn't have to be cause and effect, guys. They don't have to go together. Now, as long as you think you have to be in control, you'll be afraid. But guys, I'm trying to show you, when life spins out of control, you don't have to be afraid. Now, I want to pause for a second, because when you think about that, you go, well, wouldn't it be amazing if somehow we could all get there? Like, she walks out on you, or the doctor calls with bad news, or you lose the job, or you don't get the scholarship. You don't get into the school you were counting on, but you're not afraid. Like, somehow you've been liberated from fear. He said to his disciples, why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? And I'm guessing here, but I bet the disciples were thinking, well, I guess not. Because Jesus, I was scared to death. Okay, whatever this test was, I guess I get a big fat F because I was freaking out, man. Now, here's what Jesus was trying to get them to understand, and this is why it was so critical that they get it. See, Jesus knew what was down the road. He knew that his death was coming soon, that he wouldn't be physically present with them for very much longer. And he was about to send these guys out into the world, to send them out with the most important mission and message that they could ever possibly be in charge of. And he knew that in the years to come, they would face many, many storms. And as long as their top priority was to stay in control of their lives, they would miss their mission. He knew that as long as they thought, as people often think, hey, if my life's out of control, then it must be out of God's control. Hey, if I can't handle this, God can't handle this. Hey, since my life is spinning out of control, God must have stopped paying attention to me. He knew that as soon as they started to tell the world about him, they'd be hunted down, and they'd be arrested, and they'd be beaten, and they'd be stripped of everything they owned. He knew that if they were diligent with the message and the mission he was giving them, they would be brutally persecuted, and eventually they'd all either be executed or exiled. And he knew that if they evaluated God's faithfulness to them based on their own ability to control circumstances, they would eventually abandon the faith altogether. So all throughout his time with them, he was trying to teach them over and over again in a multitude of contexts and situations. look, you've got to learn to separate these two things. Life can spin out of control, and God can still be doing a great work. Just because you're losing control doesn't mean that God is losing control. So somewhere along the way, you're going to have to let go of trying to manage and control your life. You're going to have to decide to just be faithful. Let God manage and control your life. You be faithful. And now that's why he could look at them and say with a straight face, why were you afraid? He wanted them to understand, look, as long as you carry all the responsibility for controlling your life, you're going to be afraid. But if you can ever get to the place in your life where you're willing to embrace the reality that God is in control, you'll be free. And you'll free the people around you. And you'll be free to love the people around you. And you'll be different. And people will know it. They will see it because you're no longer driven by fear. And then this story concludes with kind of a life-altering moment. Verse 41, it says, they were terrified and asked each other, who is this? I mean, imagine you're in the boat, and you're looking at this guy a couple feet away from you. Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. I mean, can you imagine what that must have felt like? The wind is gone now, and the sea is calm, and they're looking at Jesus now in the stillness, in the quiet. Who is this? Even the wind and waves obey him. And this overwhelming awe sweeps over them. And in that unforgettable moment, something began to happen in them that would mark them for the rest of their lives. And if this could happen somehow to you and to me, we would be different forever. Here's what happened. Their fear of the storm was overshadowed by their awe of Jesus. They got a small glimpse that night into the sheer majesty, just a small glimpse into the sheer majesty of Jesus. And it was a moment that served as fuel for the rest of their lives. And over again, they had seen and would continue to see the raw power of Jesus. And these guys became men who were convinced that regardless of how big the storms in life might become, Jesus was bigger. That no matter how much things might spin out of control, it didn't matter because ultimately there was one in control that was greater than any storm they would ever face. And he wasn't just great because he could control storms. He was great because, and they watched it, he was willing to endure the cross. The greatest storm known to man, like out of his majestic love. He was the one that had power to control it all. Like he could make lightning and thunder and wind and waves obey. Like he could overcome disease and deafness. They'd later find out he could even defeat death. And because his absolute power was combined somehow with perfect love, those men entrusted themselves to Jesus, and they gave their lives to serve him. They eventually came to a place where they said, maintaining control of our lives is not our top priority. Like being faithful, actually, is our top priority. We're going to surrender all control to God and simply do what's right. And that's what they did. And if things spin out of control, then they spin. But we're going to trust Jesus with the ultimate outcomes. And they did. And later on, things got way out of control for them. And they were all eventually treated very badly. And they were all led someplace they didn't want to go. And eventually they lost control of their very lives. But they remained faithful to the end. And I can't think of any group of friends that have had a bigger impact on the world than those guys. That's just historical fact. They relinquished control, exchanged it for simple faithfulness, and they lived lives of unbelievable meaning. And guys, if you and I somehow learned to do the same, man, where would that lead us? What if we let our awe of Jesus overshadow our fears? Like, what if instead of trying to manage and control everything, we simply resign to be faithful Like, what if we humbly said, God, ultimately, I'm not in control. Like in reality, I can't even control whether or not my heart takes another beat. Ultimately, you're in control and I'm not. So help me trust you and give my life over to you. Help me more and more to choose faithfulness over control. Because I'm not really in control anyway. I can't control the economy. I can't control other people's decisions or opinions. But I can choose to be faithful to you. And so, God, please help me. Help me do that. Fear is a powerful thing. And it affects us in ways we don't even realize. Now, some of you are here this morning, and the truth is you're facing a raging storm in some arena of your life. It could be your health. It could be your career. It could be a relationship. It could be hard things in the life of someone that you love. But things are out of control. And if that's you this morning, man, I think God would say to you, hey, look, I see. I know. And I want you to know I've got you. You are in the palm of my hand, and I will never let you go because you're mine. And you are so precious to me. This storm will not have the last word. It won't. So trust me. Now, some of you are here this morning, and if you're honest, fear is having its way with you. You're so afraid that you will lose control that you're trying to somehow manage all of it. And you're doing things in the process that violate your deepest values. And to justify it, you're saying, okay, but I have no choice. And if that's you this morning, I think you need to hear a voice from the Father too. I think he's saying, okay, look, you always have a choice. There's always a choice. Be true to yourself. Be true to who I'm calling you to be. Let go and leave the outcomes to me. You're not in too deep. You're never in too deep. You know why? Because my grace is sufficient for you. Trust me. It's time to choose faithfulness over control. Let it go and watch what I do in you, through you. And some of you are here this morning, and you're in a place in your life where you're doing a hard thing. Like some of you are taking a pretty major risk out of obedience. And you're just kind of letting go. You're choosing faithfulness over control, but secretly you wonder, like, is it worth it? Does it matter? And I think you need to hear God saying to you, oh yeah, it matters. Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with the small things, and bigger things are coming. Well done. I see, I know how afraid you are. I know that you're choosing faithfulness, and it'll be worth it. It will be worth it. I promise. Well done. Fear is a powerful thing. But there's one so much more powerful. And when our awe of him overshadows our fear, then we're free. And so may we learn more and more to live in that freedom